الذين آمنوا وتطمئن قلوبهم بذكر الله ألا بذكر الله تطمئن القلوب أفضل ذكر فاعلم أنه لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا 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 الله 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 لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا الله سيدنا محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم. وإلى حضرة النبي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم. الفاتحة. Page 133, the invocations after the Fajr prayer. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألف لام ميم ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك وبالآخرة هم يوقنون أولئك على هدى من ربهم أولئك هم المفلحون. وإلهكم إله واحد لا إله إلا هو الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أقدم إليك بين يدي كل نفس ولمحة ولحظة وخطرة وطرفة يطرف بها أهل السماوات والأرض وكل شيء هو في علمك كائن أو قد كان أقدم إليك بين يدي ذلك كله. الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض من الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون من علمه إلا بما شاء وسع كرسي السماوات والأرض ولا يؤوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم. لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وإن تبدوا ما في أنفسكم أو تخفوه يحاسبكم به الله فيغفر لمن يشاء ويعذب من يشاء والله على كل شيء قدير. آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون كلنا آمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله وقالوا سمعنا وأطعنا غفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا وأخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. آمين. شهد الله أنه لا إله إلا هو والملائكة وأولو العلم قائما بالقسط لا إله إلا هو العزيز الحكيم. وأنا أشهد بما شهد الله به وأشهد الله على ذلك الشهادة وهي لي عند الله وديعة أسأله حفظها حتى يتوفاني عليها. إن الدين عند الله الإسلام. قل اللهم مالك الملك اللهم مالك الملك تؤتي الملك من تشاء وتنزع الملك ممن تشاء وتعز من تشاء وتذل من تشاء بيدك الخير إنك على كل شيء قدير تولج الليل في النهار وتولج النهار في الليل وتخرج الحي من الميت وتخرج الميت من الحي وترزق من تشاء بغير حساب رحمن الدنيا والآخرة ورحمهما تؤتي من تشاء منهما وتمنع من تشاء أنت ترحمنا فارحمنا رحمة تؤمن بها رحمة من سواك اللهم اقضي عنا الدين واغننا من الفقر وتوفنا في عبادتك بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين آمين رب العالمين ما شاء الله. We're on page 145 or 146. The word of Sayyidina Shaykh Abu Bakr bin Sa'd. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم يا عظيم السلطان يا قديم الإحسان يا دائم النعم يا كثير الجود يا واسع العطاء يا خفي اللطف يا جميل الصنع لم لا يعجل صل يا ربي على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم وارض عن صحابته أجمعين. اللهم لك الحمد ولك المن فضلا وأنت ربنا حقا ونحن عبيدك رقا وأنت لم تزل ذلك أهلا يا ميسر كل يسير ويا جابر كل كثير ويا صاحب كل فريد ويا مغني كل فقير ويا مقوي كل ضعيف ويا مأمن كل مخيف يسر علينا كل أسير فتيسير الأسير عليك يسير. اللهم يا من لا يحتاج إلى البيان والتفسير حاجاتنا كثير وأنت عالم بها وخبير. اللهم إني أخاف منك وأخاف ممن يخاف منك وأخاف من لا يخاف منك. اللهم بحق من يخاف منك نجنا ممن لا يخاف منك. اللهم بحق سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم احرسنا بعينك التي لا تنام واكنفنا واحفظنا بكنفك الذي لا يرام، وارحمنا بقدرتك علينا فلا نهلك وأنت ثقتنا ورجاؤنا. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم، والحمد لله رب العالمين، عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. اللهم إنا نسألك زيادة في الدين وبركة في العمر وصحة في الجسد وسعة في الرزق وتوبة قبل الموت، شهادة عند الموت ومغفرة بعد الموت وعفوا عند الحساب ونصيبا من الجنة، وارزقنا النظر إلى وجهك الكريم. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون، وسلام على المرسلين، والحمد لله رب العالمين. كذا خوكي ورضا نفسي وزنة عرشي ومداد كلماتي. وينفعنا بهم ويزيدنا من بركاتهم وإلى حضرة النبي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم. الفاتحة. Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To all of the salams, we're going to read Al-Word al-Latif, page 151 or 152. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق من شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون. من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون. ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون. أفحسبتم أنما خلقناكم عبثا وأنكم إلينا لا ترجعون. فتعالى الله الملك الحق لا إله إلا هو رب العرش الكريم. ومن يدع مع الله إلها آخر لا برهان له به فإنما حسابه عند ربه إنه لا يفلح الكافرون. وقل رب اغفر وارحم وأنت خير الراحمين. فسبحان الله حين تمسون وحين تصبحون وله الحمد في السماوات والأرض وعشيا وحين تظهرون يخرج الحي من الميت ويخرج الميت من الحي ويحيي الأرض بعد موتها وكذلك تخرجون. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب وشهادته هو الرحمن الرحيم. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله عما يشركون. هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. سلام على نوح في العالمين إنا كذلك نجزي المحسنين إنه من عبادنا المؤمنين. أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق. أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق. من شر ما خلق. بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم. بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم. شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم. اللهم إني أسمعت منك بنعمة وعافية وستر فتمم نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إني أسمعت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر فتمم نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إني أسمعت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر فتمم نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إني أسمعت أشهدك وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. اللهم إني أسمعت أشهدك وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. اللهم إني أسمعت أشهدك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. اللهم إني أسمعت أشهدك وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيدا. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيدا. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيدا. فآمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بالجبت والطاغوت واستمسكت بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم. آمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بالجبت والطاغوت واستمسكت بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم. آمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بالجبت والطاغوت واستمسكت بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم. رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا. رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا. رضيت بالله ربا دينا وبسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. 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 اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد. اللهم إني أسألك من فجاءة الخير وأعوذ بك من فجاءة الشر. اللهم أنت ربي لا إله إلا أنت خلقتني وأنا عبدك وأنا على عهدك ووعدك ما استطعت أعوذ بك من شر ما صنعت أبوء لك بنعمتك علي وأبوء بذنبي فاغفر لي فإنه لا يغفر الذنوب إلا أنت اللهم أنت ربي لا إله إلا أنت عليك توكلت وأنت رب العرش العظيم ما شاء الله كان وما لم يشأ لم يكن ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم أعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير وأن الله قد أحاط بكل شيء علما اللهم إني أعوذ بك من شر نفسي ومن شر كل دابة أنت آخذ من ناصيتها إن ربي على صراط مستقيم يا حي يا قيوم برحمتك أستغيث ومن عذابك أستجير أصلح لي شأني كله ولا تكلني إلى نفسي خلقك طرفة عين اللهم إني أعوذ بك من الهم والحزن وأعوذ بك من العجز والكسل وأعوذ بك من الجبن والبخل وأعوذ بك من غلبة الدين وكر الرجال اللهم إني أسألك العافية في الدنيا والآخرة اللهم إني أسألك العفو والعافية والمعافاة الدائمة في ديني ودنياي وأهلي ومالي اللهم استر عوراتي وآمن رواتي اللهم احفظني من بين يدي ومن خلفي وعن يميني وعن شمالي ومن فوقي وأعوذ بعظمتك أن أغتال من تحتي اللهم أنت خلقتني وأنت تهديني وأنت تطعمني وأنت تسقيني وأنت تحييني وأنت على كل شيء قدير أصبحنا على فطرة الإسلام
وعلى كلمة الإخلاص وعلى دين نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه
وآله وسلم وعلى ملة أبينا إبراهيم حنيفا مسلما وما كان من المشركين اللهم بك أصبحنا وبك أمسينا وبك نحيا وبك نموت وعليك نتوكل وإليك النشور وأصبح الملك لله والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم إني أسألك خير هذا اليوم فتحه ونصره ونوره وبركته وهداه اللهم إني أسألك خير هذا اليوم وخير ما فيه
وخير ما قبله وخير ما بعده
وأعوذ بك من شر هذا اليوم وشر ما فيه وشر ما قبله وشر ما بعده اللهم ما أصبح بي من نعمة أو بأحد من خلقك فمنك وحدك لا شريك لك فلك الحمد ولك الشكر على ذلك سبحان الله وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسي وزنة عرشي ومداد كلماته سبحان الله وبحمده عدد خلقه زنة عرشي ومداد كلماته سبحان الله وبحمده عدد خلقه ومداد كلماته سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسي وزنة عرشي ومداد كلماته سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقه كلماته سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسي وزنة عرشي ومداد كلماته سبحان الله عدد ما خلق في السماء سبحان الله عدد ما خلق في الأرض سبحان الله عدد ما بين ذلك سبحان الله عدد ما هو خالق
الحمد لله عدد ما خلق في السماء
الحمد لله عدد ما خلق في الأرض الحمد لله عدد ما بين ذلك
الحمد لله عدد ما هو خالق
لا إله إلا الله عدد ما خلق في السماء لا إله إلا الله عدد ما خلق في الأرض لا إله إلا الله عدد ما بين ذلك لا إله إلا الله عدد ما هو خالق الله أكبر عدد ما خلق في السماء الله أكبر عدد ما خلق في الأرض الله أكبر عدد ما بين ذلك الله أكبر عدد ما هو خالق لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما خلق في السماء لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما خلق في الأرض لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما بين ذلك
لا حول ولا قوة إلا
بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما هو خالق الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله عدد ما في علم الله صلاة وسلاما دائمين بدوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه عدد كل ذرة فمرة.
اللهم صل وسلم
على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله عدد ما في علم الله صلاة وسلاما دائمين بدوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه عدد كل ذرة فمرة. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله عدد ما في علم الله صلاة وسلاما دائمين بدوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه عدد كل ذرة فمرة. في كل لحظة أبدا عدد خلقي ورضا نفسي وزنة عرشي ومدار كلماتي ورسولي فري من الله يولي درجات في الجنة ويكتب مثباتهم ويضاف حسناتهم ويفضل نجاهم وينفعنا بهم ويدلنا من بركاتهم ومن منفعتهم ومن الدين والدنيا والآخرة. وإذا حضرة النبي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم. الفاتحة. Please use that mic.
Objective: communicating sacred knowledge to students and increasing their religious understanding. The means of achieving this goal are as follows. 1. The teacher or speaker should speak in an audible and clear voice in order that those who are present hear and understand easily. 2. He must speak slowly and distinctly so that students hear carefully and comprehensively. A hadith states that the Prophet ﷺ would utter each word distinctly, and if the listener wanted to count the words the Prophet used, he would be able to do so. 3. He should use appropriate gestures to highlight and clarify what he is discussing without being excessive in his usage of them. 4. He should make eye contact with those present during his lesson to ensure they are attentive and listening. 5. He should repeat the most fundamental points of the lesson and should provide a summary of them at the end of the presentation.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad وآله وصحبه والتابعين لهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وعلينا معهم وفيهم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وإنا تعلم وتعليم. We intend to learn and teach. والنفع والانتفاع, to give and take benefit. والتذكير والمذاكرة, to remind and ourselves remember. والإفادة والاستفادة, to profit mutually. والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وبسنة رسول الله sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi wa sallam, and encouraging adherence to Allah's book and the Sunnah of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi wa sallam, wa du'a ila al-huda wa dilalata ala al-khair ibtigha'a wajhi Allah wa maradati wa qurbi wa thawabihi subhanahu wa ta'ala. Intend calling the guidance and leading the good, and all of that seeking Allah's countenance, pleasure, nearness to Allah and His reward subhanahu wa ta'ala. We intend what the author and compilers of this intended, as well as our sheikhs and the pious, and what Allah knows of good intentions, to continue or to proceed. We are continuing this lesson in Maqasid Halaqat at-Ta'lim, the aims of circles of teaching. And 4 aims were mentioned. The first of them being instilling ta'zeem for the deen, imparting a reverence for the deen in the hearts of the students. And the second is what we are now, and that is teaching them the meanings, right? Making them understand the information and conveying that to them and helping them understand the deen. So that's really this is, you could say, this one is imparting information. But prior to that, the first aim was imparting a state of reverence for the deen, of seeing the deen as important itself. And that will lead to a desire to understand the information as being imparted. And if we attain the information without reverence for Allah and His Messenger, we won't obey Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we seek refuge in Allah from that. And someone can memorize a lot but not benefit. And the Prophet, no, that's not the Prophet. Imam al-Shafi'i said that knowledge is not what is memorized, but what benefits. Benefit is what we're hoping from knowledge. So may Allah grant us to benefit. So this means the second aim are as follows. So first of all, he mentions that the teacher or speaker should articulate himself with an elevated voice. So he said audible. Yeah, he should raise his or her voice. People have to hear you, so that it is easy for those who are present to hear. So one has to project one's voice, make sure that people hear one, and that's obvious. And the Prophet ﷺ, his voice, he could make people hear him at great distance. At Hajjat Wada, they heard him. And he could be praying in the masjid, and people in the house could hear him in their homes. And there's probably a mu'jiza there as well. But in addition to that, he would project his voice. Allahumma salli wa sallam wa barak alayhi wa ala alihi. Generally, raising our voices is not praiseworthy. Generally. So generally, we shouldn't speak loud. We should speak softly generally. And there are exceptions to that. So the Prophet ﷺ, he was not known to shout in markets, right? He didn't shout in the market. And the market, you can shout. But if he would lead a prayer or if he would speak, people could hear him. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. Also, the mu'adhin raises his voice, saying, Labbaik Allahumma. We raise our voice. The Prophet ﷺ, however, he might speak to an elder like Abbas, who was only 2 years older than him, and he'd speak so softly you couldn't hear him. If you were close, you couldn't hear what he was saying because he would lower his voice when he would speak to Sayyidina Al-Abbas, his uncle, who was just a couple years older than him. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But in the context of a lesson, the voice should be raised. And we should teach students that as well, that in lessons, we project our voice. In prayers, we project our voice. And other times, we might speak more softly. And that's an etiquette. And I'm just emphasizing that as not to confuse that with other contexts. And also, here in the United States, some of these subtleties really escape us easily. And also with pop culture, some of that may escape us, but we want to work on that. So we want to articulate ourselves well in a lesson, but otherwise be of those that are people of sakina and waqar, calmness and solemnity. La ilaha illallah. And the second, La ilaha illallah. And يتأنى في إلقاء تماما, to be completely how does he translate that first sentence?
He said he must speak slowly and distinctly so that students hear carefully and comprehensively.
Yeah. So he should be entirely deliberate in how he speaks, not hasty. Yata'anna, right? Not rush, right? And be measured entirely in how he speaks, so that it is easy to comprehend. And it comes in hadith that he sallallahu alayhi wasallam used to speak word for word. You could count the words. Someone listening to him could count the words that he would say, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And that is in Shama'il. You'll find it at least in Nabahani's Shama'il, but I believe we'll find it in that hadith in At-Tirmidhi Shama'il. And there is a hadith where Sayyidatina Aisha overhears one of the companions delivering hadith, and she says that the Prophet ﷺ wouldn't run his speech together like that. So he would speak in a very measured way where the letters were distinct and they could be memorized by the one who heard them, and also they could even be counted. And something that was important, he might repeat it. I was speaking to my wife, who was reminding me to repeat terms more that are new in our Arabic grammar class, because people are just being introduced to those words. And it reminded me of our teacher, Al-Habib Ali Mashhur, rahimahullah, who they say, and this is a compliment that they give to fuqaha teachers, to teachers of fiqh. I've heard it from others in the past, but they say of Habib Mashhur that he could teach fiqh even to a donkey, meaning even someone that wasn't particularly intelligent could learn from him. And one of the things he would do is really repeat. He'd repeat so much that if you're kind of quick to understand, you'd be like, man, I wish we'd keep going. But you would get the dars, and everyone would get the dars. So repetition will help too. I might be jumping ahead, but speak audibly and distinctly, clearly, not hastily. 3, he could use, how does he translate that?
Appropriate gestures.
Yeah, gestures. Yep. Pointing, hand gestures that are appropriate in order to emphasize properly and make things clear, though without excess, not being excessively animated, but to gesture. And actually for khutbah, like khutbah in the legal books, the khatib isn't supposed to look around a lot or gesture a lot. He's supposed to hold the staff with one side or something like that, and the minbar with the other. I think the left for the staff, ideally, minbar on the right, and speak straight. However, we find our teachers depart from that a little bit, but it shouldn't be excessive. It shouldn't be excessive. And now he said gesture, and that's where gestures are helpful, though also if it's a book of fiqh, to stand up and do ruku' and show that, or sujood, or how do you do bow sitting, how do you sit in iftirash, especially with children. Pictures worth 1,000 words. Demonstrating things also is helpful, and one shouldn't mistake from seeing large lessons by those that might be being filmed or things like that one never does that. So you might see, you might watch Alim so-and-so on his Facebook page, and he teaches fiqh, and you never see him demonstrate. but that's to a large halaqah. He's being filmed. He's older. But in the halaqah at Dar Mustafa, for example, you'll see the teacher stand up and bow and show these various things. For a nahu halaqah or a grammar halaqah or an inheritance halaqah, they'll bring out a little chalkboard and you'll see them writing out examples and things like that. Basically, what's needed of gestures and so on, demonstrations, sometimes written examples in order to help people understand and make it clear. Inshallah, all of those tools can be used. We met Sudani teachers of Quran that like to teach on a floor that was made of sand, and they would use sand like a chalkboard. And then, of course, erase it after that. And that he observe while teaching the faces of the students to make sure that they are paying attention, right? To make sure that they are listening and paying attention. What does he say there?
Attentive and listening.
Yeah, that they're attentive and listening. Also, you could tell by facial expressions, is someone confused? Though there are different people. I have a friend who's very intelligent, and he'll look like dazed. He'll look like almost falling asleep or high when he's learning, right? And that's when he's really deeply concentrating. So people may differ, but one should, especially young people, and ideally that's the context of a lot of teaching. You got to make sure they're paying attention. Sayyidi al-Habib Omar, we'd be in a roha, and the musalla is big. It's at least 50 yards to the back and a couple hundred yards wide. And he would observe students like in a back corner leaning against the wall, joking around. And he might point out that, you have to sit up and pay attention and be here with us in this lesson. La ilaha illallah. 5, that primary, or you could say key questions should be repeated, and the important points in the lesson. So there should be repetition. And there it is. There should be repetition. And it might be a lot of repetition. You might repeat so much that a really intelligent student can almost memorize it from the lesson. And then someone that has more trouble understanding, at least they get it. And conclude and summarize. Sayyid al-Habib, one of the things that he did that we'll try to do sometimes is he would usually go ahead. He would go ahead at the end and essentially read through the metan of the next lesson. And then we'd come back and he would comment on it for repetition. So even to that extent, at the end, jumping ahead in the primary text that's being studied and then coming back over that section again. So basically using techniques, in this case, repetition, and repetition is very important. Repetition is very important. And you see that a lot in pedagogy of traditional Muslim pedagogy, repetition of statements, and also repetition of material across or through numerous increments in the curriculum. And also repetition of the same material. And that's something that those of us that are educated in the West, we may not be as familiar with. So for example, you'll have someone who has had access of, say, the Maqasid of Al-Imam al-Nawawi. It's a short book in fiqh. Maybe about that thick, an inch thick. And maybe they were gifted that, or they bought that. Maybe they've embraced Islam, or they've gotten introduced to Islamic studies. And they'll say, oh, I read that. And what they mean is they just read through it as we read one time. And that's not how those books are taught. Those books are taught almost by memorization or by memorization. A book like that may not necessarily be memorized, especially prose. A lot of times they'll memorize poetry more, but it should almost be memorized. So the student might read it scores of times before and after their lesson. And Mauritanians who memorize a lot, they might memorize, repeat something hundreds of times. Grab a subha, and just like we do adhkar, they're repeating a metan. And they have amazing memories. So they would repeat it a lot, and then their teacher will teach it, and as was mentioned, as part of a technique of teaching it, there'll be repetition. However, in addition to that, they may repeat the very same questions in a slightly larger text as part of their curriculum. And by that, they learn repetition. They say repetition will even teach a donkey. And memorization is a beneficial part of learning. And one of the things that memorization does is it helps you embody what you're learning. And you have it with you. You have it with you. The Imam Shafi'i said that his knowledge was with him. If he's in the market, it's with him. And if he's in the masjid or in the home, the line escapes me, it's with him. He carried it with him. And then it also helps you act on it. So that's something that we should accustom ourselves to. And it's the same. To a degree, it's similar. If someone were to say they took and read through an algebra book, they wouldn't think they knew algebra. Islamic studies are similar to a degree. You know, you're going to algebra, pre-algebra, lower, more advanced, and so on. You got to go through material multiple times if you really want to learn it. And that's also one of the harms of the kind of edutainment Islam that we have. It's not always going to be entertaining. Some of it's going to be somewhat rigorous. It takes some discipline, sit. But by that, you actually take on information and knowledge and carry it with some precision such that you could deliver it, And may Allah grant us that in lutf and afiyah.
Yeah.
Allahu Akbar wa lillahi alhamd. This is a long chapter. We're going to keep going. You can read the next 5, please.
Number 6, he should open the floor for questions and offer clarity through the responses. Number 7, he should encourage participants to take notes, especially if what they hear is new to them. They should have a notebook for this and should record pertinent information separately depending on the subject or science. Number 8, he should ask questions at the beginning of each lesson regarding the points taught in the previous lesson. Number 9, he should revise the questions at the end of the week or month or every time a new chapter or chapters are covered. Number 10, he should encourage participants to strengthen what they have memorized and perfect their articulation of it, as well as to engage in constant review and repetition of their work. He should advise them not to be content with merely memorizing their work and feeling that they have fully comprehended it. The poet notes, if you desire to memorize what you have learned, that is only through repeated review of your lesson.
Bismillah. So 6 is opening the opportunity for questions. Open the opportunity for questions. And show concern to clearly answer. And that can be written questions, or that can be by saying, is that clear? I remember some of the teachers at Sham would say, wadah, like it's clear. And that's giving you opportunity to say no, or clarify this. Now, for a seeker of knowledge, when you're studying a discipline or a text in a discipline, it's blameworthy to ask questions outside of the context of your lesson. That shows that you're not necessarily paying attention or your mind's elsewhere, and that takes the time and the attention of the lesson away from where the focus should be, which is understanding this lesson. And I say for a seeker of knowledge because if you're teaching those who aren't dedicating time to seeking knowledge, and their aim isn't necessarily to learn this text or this discipline as part of a curriculum, they just have their life. So if you open the sphere for questions, you're going to get all kind of questions that are from all different areas. And some of it might even just be revealing some of the hardships that those people are going through, which in a context, a general context of inviting them to Allah is very important, and a lot of care should be shown for that. However, for seekers of knowledge that are dedicated seekers of knowledge, they should let the curriculum guide them through the material and get in the habit of that. Even the way they articulate the questions, they should do so the way the books do, because that's educating them so that first they learn how to organize material like the book, then they learn how to speak like the book, so that hopefully their minds become like the books of those who wrote those, the minds of those who wrote those books. And that will help. And then also we should help the young people, and I notice this a lot with children who are educated in the United States, that the opportunity to ask questions will be opened, and kids, even young kids, then want to comment or want to share information that they have or what have you. And we should steer them away from that. Our own kids, we should steer them away from that. It's not in the interest of a child to accustom them to want to be the center of attention or to attract attention to themselves for its own sake in a public forum. And I think we do that a little bit. We want to teach them it's good, speak up, don't be too shy, which is another issue. Shyness is a virtue. And really what used to be said here, don't speak until you're spoken to. And when you're asked, respond to the extent that you've been asked. Those are actually Islamic etiquettes as well. Those are old-fashioned etiquettes here, and they're Islamic etiquettes. And I think modern education, I don't know specifically what it is, but I've observed it. And so when we open the sphere for questions, it should be for questions about the lesson and not for necessarily comments. But sometimes the teacher may open the sphere for comments, or in another context, if it's a shura, then obviously commentary is what's requested. But if it's questions, what's requested is questions about that specific material, and that's when we have a group that we're taking through that material with the aim of imparting that subject to them, or that discipline or that text. So we should open the sphere for questions. And that doesn't mean sometimes the teacher may have to answer and say the answer's coming, but the teacher should take questions, clarify, and alhamdulillah. La ilaha illallah. Also, they should be encouraged to write down benefits, fawaid. How does he translate that? Fawaid.
Encourage participants to take notes, especially if what they hear is new to them.
Yeah. So yeah, he did. All right. So fawaid, like beneficial points from the lesson, should be written. And that doesn't mean you write the whole lesson, but some of the lesson should be written. And for us and our students, we want to get more in the habit of writing hard notes and remove and distance ourselves more and more from the habit of taking our notes in devices, because there's a benefit to handwriting. There are benefits in that. We shouldn't entirely leave pens and paper. And no. And they should organize their notes. Those are beneficial points. And number 8. Yes. Great. Question was someone writing in a notebook. What about writing in the text itself? That's of benefit too. Though from experience, a lot of times there won't be enough space if you're taking a lot of notes. So you might transcribe notes over from a daftar to your metin, but it's acceptable, and that's something that's very common among seekers of knowledge. Even texts began to be written in the margins, and that's where you get the word hashia, because they would write in the margins. And 8, excuse me, not 9, 8, that was 7, right? That was 7. 8, the teacher should ask them at the beginning of the lesson about important questions from the previous lesson. That's very beneficial. And that's something the author did a lot. We would be expected to memorize many points from the previous lesson by the next lesson. And you might be asked to stand and answer. You can't sit down until you're able to answer. And that the student should, the teacher should quiz them at the end of the week or the month or whenever concluding a book or a chapter or numerous chapters or a book. So written quizzes should at times be given. And that's something we've gotten away from that we maybe should get back to, especially now that people are studying more thoroughly. We've been sufficing ourselves with asking them at the end of, at the next lesson. When we were doing the Rabat and people were going through books more thoroughly, we were giving written tests. And we got to get back to that. Also, like a Dars Khas, usually they won't test you as much. They expect that you're disciplined and it's one-on-one. You should know it. Roha books, they wouldn't test so much. But a metin that is really learned, they would give tests. And that the students be required to strengthen what they've memorized and articulate it well. We really have to work on this. Good articulation. Because we're dealing with, you could probably say primarily, even in the North American context, demographically, we're going to have primarily non-native speakers of Arabic. So there's going to have to be a lot of work on articulation, proper articulation, and that will help memorization. So we have to work on that, making sure that they're articulating it well, because otherwise they'll be learning and memorizing mistakes. So we've got to work on that. And they should be encouraged to repeat a lot of repetition themselves and review. As we stated, I talked to a Shanqit. If you repeat it 100 times, is that a lot? He said, no, it's not. Grabbing a subhan, repeating. La ilaha illallah, like Quran. If somebody's memorizing Quran and they're not repeating it like 25 times at a minimum, 40, 50, hundreds of times, in addition to putting in their prayers, they're going to lose it. They're going to lose it. And that's something, and little kids will have to really be disciplined to get them to do that, because it's monotonous, right? To sit and repeat something 25 times, 41 times, 100 times, that's monotonous. But how are you going to get it if you don't repeat it? So we should repeat and teach them to repeat. And none of the students should suffice with just memorizing it and think that they've known it. They should repeat what they've memorized various ways. And then he recited this poetry, in shittum and tahfadhu ma alimtum fadhalika fi takriri darsin wa tardadi. If you wish to memorize what you've learned, that isn't repeating the lesson. And review. Yes.
I had a question in regards to teaching children and not accustoming them to be the center of, or and so in the children's class, I allow a section of time where I ask each child, like we're learning about saying alhamdulillah, everybody tell me something that they want to say that in their life they're grateful for that. Partly just to make sure they're understanding the concept, but also to part of my intention was to keep them focused because they're waiting for their turn. And is that bad though? Because,
Why are they waiting for their turn?
I mean, because it's going down the line, so they're all listening and waiting.
They're waiting for their turn among the kids, or the turn between the teacher?
Among the kids to be able to say their reason why they're grateful or whatever it is. But I give them each of a turn to do that. Is that not best?
I think inshallah it's fine. I was talking about the examples when we say, is that clear? And then the ones that are a microphone fiend take it as an opportunity to tell us, when I was 3, I memorized this and it's so cute. Like those type of digressions to just like obvious, just, wanting to be the speaker and wanting to, kind of attention. But if it's related to the dars, and we should definitely ask them to articulate what they've learned or articulate what they've understood and, place them. And this is the time when maybe they're not really as interested in it, but it's a part of what they should learn is especially the ones that memorize well, but all of them work up to it, to stand up before the community and recite their Quran or recite a hadith or eventually, give public talks. That's beautiful. And definitely we should do that. Not that they should always be discouraged to speak, but just totally off the subject, totally just off the subject and a commentary at a time that is not the proper context. And Allah knows best. And this one is getting ready to become real long because he's going to go through a bunch of curriculum. Inshallah ta'ala. So we got a lesson, likely have a lesson on Wednesday. Inshallah, but I'll update you if we don't. And please recite Fatiha seeking from Allah sincere, accepted works, beneficial knowledge, good teaching, calling and guidance, that Allah be pleased with us and please the heart of the Prophet. Allahumma salli wa sallam wa baraka alayhi wa alayhi. And the Lord of the Fatiha that we recite, go to our parents, our teachers, our sheikhs, the author, his parents, shuyukh, and to the presence of the Prophet Muhammad. Allahumma salli wa sallam wa baraka alayhi wa alayhi. Al-Fatiha. Bismillah. Yeah, some of us are from the age of Eric B. and Rakim. Yeah. Sabakumullah bi khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah bless you all. That's an in-house joke. Some of the kids, some of the boys are microphone fiends. Some men are microphone fiends too. Allahu Akbar. We made Hajj with Sheikh Mahi. Sise. Hafidhullah. And mashallah. Talk about an example of waqar. Of sakin and waqar. And also humility. An example of solemnity, tranquility. And you just be sitting quietly, just laying among the Africans. And I knew who he was. I don't think everyone on the Hajj group knew who he was. And there were some guides that were younger guys, du'at from the States. And one of the servants of Sheikh Mahi said that they were microphone fiends. Kept wanting to stand up and give talks. And I didn't see him object except one time. This brother, he stood up and gave a talk at Arafah before Dhuhr and admonished the pilgrims to be involved in ibadah rather than rest, which is a mistake, fiqhan. Because now, because of the crowds of Hajj, you arrive to Arafah early, maybe even the night before, because later, if everyone's trying to come on to Arafah after Dhuhr, which is actually Sunnah, they're not going to make it, some of them, before the time's out. Then it's just going to be a mess. So they get people there early. And that's, just an organizational detail related to the modern, very congested Hajj. So we happen to be there early, and Arafah, the wukuf hasn't begun. Someone who had studied some law would know the wukuf hasn't begun. It's not time to do the wukuf bi Arafah. It's just whatever time. It's just, you were supposed to be outside of Arafah, and then the khutbah delivered at Dhuhr, and then you move into Arafah after Dhuhr. So the guy stood up and kind of, yelled at the pilgrims for not worshiping at a time when they were allowed rest. So that frustrated him, but that was the only time I saw him do that. Otherwise, he'd just be there, chilling humbly. Allah yahfadahu. Alhamdulillah. Place everyone in Allah's care. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.